You're listening to Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron.
I was looking at the list of films that they removed, and one of them is actually on my Halloween watch list this year, which is the remake of Roald Dahl's The Witches with Anne Hathaway, which I heard was actually kind of a good, scary kids horror movie. So I just went and ordered the Blu-ray of it on Amazon.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, but I don't know what they're doing. I didn't know Discovery bought HBO.
Yeah, they merged like just a few months ago, I guess. I didn't even hear about it, to be honest.
So where does Time Warner fit in?
Oh, that's a good question. I
thought
it's
Warner
all
Brothers,
different layers of companies and everything else.
Yeah, I thought Warner Brothers owned HBO.
Well, I think Discovery and Warner Brothers merged, so now I guess Discovery has control of everything Warner Brothers had, so HBO and whatever else. But it stinks that they're just removing stuff from HBO, and everyone's saying how they think HBO is like pretty much the best streaming platform out there because they just have pretty much everything you could possibly want.
They have a lot. I find it very like mechanically clunky when I use it. It's one of the ones that craps out more than any of the other ones. But because I know that new Warner Brothers CEO, he's the one that's been like dropping the hammer on all the DC stuff and everything. Right.
Yeah, I think he might be somehow related to Discovery, but I'm not sure. I don't know too much about the details of that.
It's crazy. Yeah, we get interesting to see, and it's just another thing that I don't want to say poor DC, but like they just can't seem to get their act together.
I know, everything keeps going wrong for them.
Yeah, it's crazy. But to be honest, they haven't put out a ton of stuff that's great. First, Man of Steel I thought was good. I don't think it was fantastic by any means.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember being kind of excited by it just because it was a really cool, interesting take on Superman, but I don't think it's aged particularly well, and then obviously the follow-ups were not that great.
Right, and then Wonder Woman was really good, Suicide Squad was really good, but that was almost like bringing in James Gunn to kind of rescue the whole situation. But
right, yeah, and you have to clarify that it's the Suicide Squad that you're talking about, not the 2016 disaster.
Exactly, right. And then obviously the Batman was great too, but I feel like that's almost kind of its own
that was
situation.
A totally disconnected thing, yeah.
Anyway, today we are here to discuss Nope, the new alien visitation, if not quite invasion, horror movie by Jordan Peele. This is Jordan Peele's third film that he's written and directed, or at least he's partially written and very much directed. I actually haven't seen Us and
Get Out.
Yeah, I was going to say No Way Out. Get Out yet. They're both not high priorities on my list, but I do want to get back and see those. So I don't have as much experience with him as you do. I know you've seen both of those films, so why don't you kick us off and give us some opening thoughts?
Yeah, well, Jordan Peele loves his kind of meaningful horror, so he always imbues a sort of message or theme in his previous work. Get Out was really, really good because it had this great setup and concept for a horror movie that had this great underlying message. Us got a little bit too weird, and I think a lot of people were a little bit disappointed with the ultimate. It had a great kind of setup, but the ultimate explanation for it was a little bit weird and ended up kind of weakening the whole thing. So this one, I was interested in what direction he would go in, and unfortunately I do think it seems to be a little bit more polarized, closer to Us than Get Out. Everyone loved Get Out, whereas Us was a little bit more back and forth. So this one is, I think, maybe closer to Get Out, but there's still a little bit of contention over the more metaphorical aspects of this film, which is kind of disappointing to me because I really feel like he took a lot of the criticism he heard from Us and really tried to apply that in this movie. Because whereas Us really gets kind of like just kind of out there towards the end, this one has a really solid like A to B plot, even though it kind of takes some detours in the middle. And I really appreciated that he tried to like still have a great kind of traditional almost Spielbergian through line while still kind of grasping at these more out there concepts. And a lot of those out there concepts were especially exciting to me because they tied in with the whole UFO theme, which I'll get into in just a sec. But overall, I thought it was great. Cinematography was great. I think it's the best depiction of a flying saucer in film since probably Close Encounters. And I just loved how it all came together and went in a slightly different direction. I have plenty of theories and other things that I'll get into, but yeah, no, I loved it.
My reaction was definitely more mixed. I guess I fall into that camp. I can say I enjoyed it, although parts of it were kind of just sort of baffling to me, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. I do agree that he pulled it through at the end. I definitely felt an emotional tug at the resolution of the whole thing in the way it sort of wrapped up. But I think for me, the challenges were the beginning of the film. I thought it was confusing because they started out with one of those metaphorical pieces that have no context. And I think there's a lot of it that still lacks an explanation, even if you consider some of the metaphors he might have been going for, and we'll get into that. I thought it was a little bit dead. There was a lot of dead spots in the movie. I just checked to see. It was 2 hours and 15 minutes. This, to me, even with the metaphorical stuff, would have been a perfect hour and 45-minute movie or hour and 52-minute movie. I think it easily could have 15 minutes shaved off and would have improved it. Like I said, it was a lot of dead spaces. A lot of the character introductions I felt were just kind of needlessly drawn out. And so I won't go any further there, but I liked a lot of it. Had some great scares, had some great visuals, and just the whole concept of the UFO in this movie and how it came about, and taking a lot of UFO tropes and just making them really cool and scary, and unexpected turns and twists. So there was a lot of that was great. All the performances overall were great. I think this wasn't a very high budget movie, but all the effect sequences, I thought for the most part were pretty effective. But there's just a lot of it that kind of was like, what are we doing and why? So I would say liked it. I think I would recommend anyone going to see it and deciding for themselves. I wouldn't just be like, no, this is not a good movie. But I had some just mixed reaction to some of the elements.
Yeah, I was kind of curious where they were going to go because I felt like they were either going to do a totally traditional, like, Close Encounter style movie with aliens and UFO spaceships and stuff, but then I also knew that he loves to kind of put his own twist on things, so I was a little bit curious if they were going to go through with that or if there was going to be some sort of greater twist to the whole thing. And especially towards the middle, well, actually, I would say even before we started seeing the UFO regularly in the movie, one of the first kind of big scare scenes is when he's kind of looking through the barn and the aliens are kind of like running around him. And I was like, wow, seems pretty early to be introducing these alien creatures, but I loved the way they were kind of moving and like kind of playfully. That reminded me of a lot of actual alien abduction accounts where they're kind of like curious and messing with you. But as soon as that sequence started, I was like, all right, it's way too early in this movie to reveal the alien. So the twist ends up being that they're the neighbor's kids messing with him. Right. And so at that point, I knew, okay, we're probably not going to be getting the traditional alien UFO story that was kind of teased. And so I guess, should we get into the big kind of spoiler of the movie?
Yeah, definitely do it.
The reveal is that the spaceship isn't actually a spaceship at all, but a giant, apparently, creature. And the kind of hole that would be where the tractor beam comes out is actually its mouth. And so it's sucking up people and objects and things with some pretty gruesome results. And I thought that was a really interesting twist. I mean, as much as I would have loved and appreciated a straightforward alien movie, I'm glad that they kind of took it in that direction, but they still had all of those kind of familiar elements, and they nodded to it with that discussion at the beginning between all the characters where they were talking about UFOs versus UAP and the Navy videos and different theories about where they come from. And so that, of course, made me very happy that they acknowledged that. And the first, I would say maybe hour and a half of this, or maybe hour of this movie, seems to me to be heavily inspired by Skinwalker Ranch, based on all the camera technology that they were using, and especially like there's one scene early where they're trying to capture the UFO and the camera is covered by a bug, which is a great scare scene, but it also reminds me of how in Skinwalker Ranch they find that cameras fail or are mysteriously blocked by things whenever something happens.
Yeah, no, definitely did take off on a lot of the tropes that, they even, joked about the ancient alien mythology and yeah, a lot of those different things. I would say, yeah, that was a disappointment moment for me, and that's purely personal. Like, I was expecting some more big alien visitation, and it's a ship with beings on it or whatever. So when it took the turn into like, no, this is this crazy like territorial jellyfish creature that is like just camped out in this area of the desert and is, hunting people. And then it gets into all the things of how, if you're not moving or you're not looking directly at it, it won't notice you. And there's, and the whole idea of where the main character, what is his OJ, Daniel Kaluuya, is kind of this horse wrangler and sort of uses his techniques over the course of the movie to try to get a handle on it. Yeah, so the introduction of the two characters, for me, Keke Palmer's character was like so over the top. I found her kind of grating, and it took me almost the whole movie to sort of warm up to her just personality and whatever. And then Daniel Kaluuya, I liked his character a little more at the beginning, but he was so like sad sack and depressed and kind of down on his luck, and his business isn't going well, in addition to obviously his dad tragically dying and everything. It just took me a long time to warm up to these characters. Like I said, by the end, I really liked him, and I said, yeah, I got the emotional tug, in the climax. That was great. And there seemed to be so much dead space or just scenes that were really just sort of getting into what they do for a living and their reaction to the dad passing away and selling the horses to the carnival down the street and introducing that. And I was just like, can we get going? I felt like every time there was a little bit of an introduction of some kind of sort of scary, creepy, when he first sees the saucer and it really looks like a saucer and it just has that great just movement that was one of the most effective things in the film. Just the way that saucer moved, especially before you knew it was a creature, was just really awesome and creepy.
Right, well, that's what I mean when I say it's the best depiction of a flying saucer, because it's just totally silent, big black mass that just moves, like almost glides over the landscape, almost like a balloon. And that was almost like part of the imagery too, was like all the balloon imagery. I wonder if that had anything to do with it too.
Interesting, yeah. So do you want to get into the whole big metaphor thing?
In a rare occurrence for me, I picked up on a lot. Well, actually, before we get into that, I will say too, a lot of this movie was kind of a commentary on the entertainment industry. So a lot of that stuff was really direct. Like I got it immediately while we were watching it, in terms of just like all the references to film production and cameras and and being on a camera crew and that sort of thing. And I think that's why the more metaphorical side plot that we're about to get into ended up working a lot better for me than it did you, because I think there was a certain level of filmmaking knowledge that he was playing with that might not have been apparent on the first viewing. But yeah, what were your kind of thoughts on the monkey massacre scene?
Yeah, the monkey massacre scene. So one of the characters who owns the carnival down the street, played by Stephen Yeun, turns out he was a child star that worked on this, fictional sitcom in the 90s or whenever it was, that had a monkey, and the monkey ended up going crazy and killing everybody in the studio, basically, except for him, and he escaped. And they keep referring back to that carnage and that scene and relating it to now Stephen Yeun is, in his mid-30s. He owns this carnival. He's this, former, down on his luck, former child star. And it turns out he's discovered this UFO. He's aware of it. He doesn't really know what it is. He is kind of like treating one of his shows at his carnival is showing how he can kind of wrangle this UFO and get it to do kind of a show for him, almost hearkening back to like how the the monkey was on the set of this TV show, and he got the monkey, to follow orders until it didn't. And of course, a parallel sort of happens. They put out a horse as bait to bring in the UFO to do its dance for the people in the audience, and then it ends up eating up the whole audience, and that's when we find out that it's really a creature and the whole thing. And so I got some of that subtext as it came about, and I get it's the idea of like Hollywood exploits people, but it seemed very disconnected from the A plot, and the fact too that it was introduced with utterly no context at the very beginning of the film, and then we keep referring back to it, and we finally figure out Stephen Yeun was part of that TV show, and that's the connection. There's almost like a tease that it's somehow related to the aliens, or like an alien presence or an alien intelligence maybe had some kind of influence over that scene. But it turns out that's not true at all. It's just really purely like a metaphorical connection to this particular kid and, then and now. And there's one particular thing when they show the studio with all the people that have been beaten to death by the monkey, and the younger Stephen Yeun is hiding under the table. There's this one scene of one of the stars that's dead or beaten up. Her shoe is mysteriously floating in the air an inch off the ground with a little dot of blood on it. So you're like, oh, that must mean something. And there must be some greater connection. But as far as I know, there was no explanation for that floating shoe, and no other explanation for just why this flashback to the carnage of the monkey was so important to the scene, other than, again, making this sort of larger point about Hollywood exploitation of actors and people and things like that. So it just, even if I understood all of that from the beginning, which is, like I said, I picked up on some of it, but I kept saying, okay, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to this. And then when it turned out there wasn't, I was like, why are you wasting my time with this when it's not really, really connected to, the main thrust of the film? So that's where I'm at on that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much you covered all of it. I guess it just worked for me because I liked the greater meaning towards it. But I also think that it was all, like, even putting aside the more metaphorical aspects, it was kind of a deeper look into why Stephen Yeun is acting as he did, because you would almost expect him to be hesitant to continue show business and exploitation like that after going through that. But the way I have seen it interpreted, and yeah, the shoe, I didn't understand the shoe at first either. And I've seen, so I can't take credit for this because I've been reading a little bit of people's comments and thoughts about it. But I think the shoe and just kind of the overall situation with the monkey really mirrors the modern or current situation with the UFO almost to a T, where to the point where they make a big point of showing that they never actually lock eyes. They only see each other through that thin like tablecloth at the very end, and there's never actually any direct eye contact, which is kind of a direct analogy to kind of the modern day plot there. But then the shoe is the first thing that he notices after the monkey has been shot and the event has ended. And I think the reason it's upright like it is in that shot is because it mirrors how he has it displayed in his kind of shrine to that event, which is a whole other thing that they kind of spend a lot of time on to kind of push forward the idea that he didn't really learn anything from this, but the first thing that he saw was the shoe and was thinking, I can grab that shoe and I can do something to publicize myself with it. He just had the wrong intentions this whole time, which ultimately ended up getting himself and one of his co-stars that survived the initial monkey beating killed when the UFO display goes out of control and they all get sucked up into the mouth of the being.
So is it the idea that the shoe floating is just him seeing the shoe through his
through his
recollection,
distorted lens, through his recollection of the memory?
So maybe it wasn't really floating?
No, yeah, I don't think it was ever supposed to be really floating. I think that kind of mirrors how he has it displayed, because it was never like a real event to him. It was always just something that he could, take advantage of and try to get money and publicity from. So that was, and that kind of builds into the whole exploitation of actors and commoditization of media and that sort of thing that I think they were kind of getting towards, because to kind of move forward with the metaphors, one thing I really liked was how there was this through line of people being filmed and animals being filmed. And to me, the fact that the UFO was this giant black circle that captures things like a lens in a camera does, to me that sums up the whole metaphor, where it's like the UFO is kind of in fact,
it's the consumer or the business of the movies,
right? Well, yeah, and to the point where
yeah.
even Stephen Yeun's character even calls them the viewers or the watchers. So like on the other side of the camera, presumably, is us watching the movie, kind of thing.
Yeah, and the mouth of the thing obviously looks very much like a camera,
right?
And the thing is, I guess, where to just not beat this to death, I guess where ultimately have a problem with is, like, I get all that stuff. Some of it I picked up on as we were watching it. A lot of it I didn't. But I think what throws me off the most is if the deepest metaphorical part of the film is this really obscure, like, recollection and remembrance and projection into forward and all this sort of story about this Stephen Yeun's character, not learning from his past experience and everything else like that. But it was the B plot. It was the C plot. So it's like the main characters were Keke Palmer and Daniel Kaluuya and their whole thing and their background and their family, and Kaluuya being the horse wrangler and how that skill ultimately helps him to wrangle the alien and all that. And so, like, there was so much weight put on this and so much time spent on this thing. Then why wasn't that guy a bigger character or more the focus of the main plot? I think that's what threw me off.
Yeah, he did get sucked up and killed off kind of quickly and abruptly, and then none of that ever really ended up playing into the rest of the plot. Yeah,
it's almost like it was its own thing. And I think, and I know I'm not the only person to be thrown by that, and I just think that's where it's not so much that, like, I can't appreciate what he may have been trying to do and the parallels and all the stuff we've just talked about. It's just the way it was fit into the overall structure of the movie threw you off, because you're like, okay, I think you want my attention over here, but you keep telling me, but with no context or explanation, that this other stuff is important. On its own, I might have been able to pick up on it, but I don't know. Again, I don't want to. It doesn't totally ruin the movie, but for me, I just had a hard time with that.
I have a theory, because I was trying to think of relating this to kind of UFO theories and thinking about the different abilities that this creature, or what they thought was a creature, had. And I was thinking also that the fact that it was able to kind of disguise itself as a cloud or produce a cloud around it. And at the end it also kind of transforms into this more like angelic or jellyfish kind of creature. So I wonder if there's a specific line early in the movie when they're talking about like UFOs and UAP and stuff. And they said, oh, it even could be us from the future. And I almost wonder if that is actually the explanation for what this is, and it's just something that's so far from the future that because it did almost look like it had a slightly technological, like when it was unfolding, it looked a little bit more technological, and then when it's in its final form there, it almost looks like you pointed out, like an old-fashioned camera and camera sensor there. So I almost wonder if that's my kind of theory, is that they're actually wrong about it being a creature, and it's actually something sent back from the super distant future that's just so far beyond our comprehension that that's just what it kind of looks like to us. But there's other things that don't fit with that theory in the movies. I've always loved that future us coming back to look at our past selves, and there's some things that play into that theme where, like, at the very beginning the horse freaks out because it's looking at itself in the mirror, and then just like the idea that it might be a big lens that's collecting things or capturing things. Maybe it's like us from the future trying to like get things from our past or find something out from our past. So I always thought that was a cool idea, and I think that seems to be where he was kind of moving towards.
Yeah, I just think there was just a lot of disparate perspectives and points. They were all kind of not really connected to each other necessarily.
Yeah, I would say that might be my biggest issue with this.
So yeah, I will say enjoyed this movie with a lot of reservations, and would have enjoyed. I just like I said, if it was shorter and had been a little more kind of cohesive, I guess I would have liked it a lot more. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I liked it, and I also thought it was pretty suspenseful and scary, which is another thing that I appreciated, because I don't get scared by a lot of movies, but just everything involving like them running from the saucer, or them like just trying to hide from it, or it like hunting them, I thought was awesome. And then that scene where they're all getting sucked up into its mouth and like digested and stuff, that was freaky.
All right, so I guess that is a wrap on Nope. So our viewing and then subsequent discussion of Nope got us just thinking about alien movies and just the alien genre. And part of why we were so excited about that is because Cam, you're super into UFO and UFO news and mythology and all that. I am too, probably not as much as you, but have definitely, being a big sci-fi nerd my whole life, loving just all the alien invasion, alien visitation movies. So we started talking about, why don't we spend some time on some of our favorites in that genre? And it's probably not even a genre, it's multiple genres. There's alien invasion movies, there's sort of alien monster movies, there's alien sort of visitation movies, and UFO and abduction. There's all kinds of stuff. So I think this will be taking a look at some of our favorites. I'm sure folks out there, for every movie we'll bring up, people will have 10 others that are favorites for them, or really big seminal movies in that space. But we're going to hit on some of the ones that we really like and why. So do you want to kick us off with one or two of your favorites?
Yeah, I wanted to specifically focus on UFO related ones because that's my thing, and I also think it's not something that gets explored in movies a lot. I mean, obviously aliens and UFOs in general are, but the actual UFO lore and kind of sticking close to what people actually report in terms of sightings and abductions, there's really not a ton of that. So I specifically want to mention a few of those, and then also some classics that have to be mentioned in terms of Alien Contact, I think, even if I'm not the biggest fan of them. So I guess I'll start off with those. E.T., which is a classic Spielberg movie. Everybody knows it. I mean, I guess it's kind of before my time, obviously, so it's always felt a little bit dated to me, and I've never really loved E.T., the alien design. He's always kind of just like freaked me out a little bit, but I think the movie definitely deserves a mention because it, alongside Close Encounters, were both heavily inspired by Spielberg's love of UFOs, so both of those kind of have a through line of like government conspiracies and the whole like scientists coming and setting up the labs, the makeshift labs to try to contact the aliens and everything else. So honorable mention, E.T., and obviously Close Encounters. I don't think much needs to be said about Close Encounters, but I think that movie stands really alone in how much it managed to capture the whole UFO, like actual UFO lore and zeitgeist. One of my favorite scenes in that movie is when all of the people are kind of camped out on the ridge there, and they're all have their binoculars and signs for the aliens, and they're all looking out, and then they all are excited because they see these lights in the distance, and they come closer and closer, and then it turns out it's helicopters and military police officers and that sort of thing. Did you see Close Encounters in the theater by any chance?
Yeah, it was great.
Man,
it was,
awesome.
And it's funny. I didn't. That's definitely on my list. I mean, that's one of the top all-time ones that goes without saying. I didn't realize how much they did dig into Project Blue Book and Alan Hynek and all of like, they really went into some very specific features around the UFO phenomenon back then. Before I thought it was just all made up, when I first saw the movie, and for the longest time, but I didn't realize how much they dug into real UFO reports to kind of put the whole story together. But yeah, obviously that's tremendous. I'll just weigh in on E.T. a little bit. I don't think I saw that in the theater when I was a kid. It didn't interest me. And it's funny, I know it's got those more serious parts that are kind of echo Close Encounters a little bit, but it always just seemed like a goofy kids movie to me, even when I was a kid. I get how influential it is. I mean, we just talked about Stranger Things recently. I mean, so much of Stranger Things, especially season 1, comes right out of E.T., so I get how important it is, but it's just always one that's kind of just never been it's got to be on the list, of course, but it's just never been one of my personal favorites.
Yeah, I guess along those same lines, before we get into more of the ones that I actually want to discuss, I watched both Contact and Arrival recently. I think you've seen both of them, but you saw Arrival in the theater and wasn't exactly what you were looking for. But it's funny how both of these are the more like science-y minded ones. Like obviously Contact was originally written by Carl Sagan, and what's funny to me is they both have that kind of a very similar ending where it's like the main character is presented with this like crazy, almost not Lovecraftian, but just like this knowledge that's just like beyond comprehension, and they go through this crazy time warp or universe altering thing, which I think is funny how much like how out there and esoteric it is compared to aliens coming in a spacecraft and abducting people, and yet those are considered the more like scientific-y kind of ones, although and I know those movies aren't really your thing either, but I have to say I did enjoy both of them, especially Arrival. I hadn't seen that until I watched it for this discussion, and I really loved the kind of twists at the end of the movie. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, Contact, I don't think I've ever gotten through it all. I've watched it, and just I find it kind of dated, and I've always just sort of lost interest in it as I watched it. But I get the similarity to Arrival. Arrival, I liked it just when you thought it was going to be this big earth-shaking, earth-shattering revelation of contact with aliens, and we're communicating with them, and what are the implications, and where do we go from here, and all that. And then as the movie went on, and then it got into that whole hearing messages in the present about Amy Adams, what her future was going to be with Jeremy Renner, and then they got divorced, and he died, and it all just sort of had this personal Twilight Zone episode spin for that particular character, and as far as the rest of the world went, it was like, it's really all about just her divorce and her relationship. And I was like, really? Like, we started out big sci-fi concept and then ended on this very personal, just sort of relationship point was the whole point of the story. And I was like, that's what sort of lost me with Arrival. But it had a lot of tremendous elements.
Yeah, well, almost in the what I was discussing in our previous discussion about Nope, about us coming back from the future, those were actually aliens, but it is revealed that they come from the future, and it's kind of a roundabout thing because it's revealed that they're giving us this knowledge so they can return to the future and we'll be prepared to help them in whatever struggle that they're facing, which I thought was kind of is kind of what brought it back to the more kind of wider implications, but that they really just like mention it and that's it. It's totally focused on Amy Adams and her relationship. So yeah, I get that.
Do you want to get into your faves? I don't have a particular ranking for these. I just have several that are just...
You go through yours and we'll see if any of them match. I think we have pretty different ones from what I understand. So why don't you name a couple of yours?
Sure. Just, again, in no particular order. A more recent one is Super 8 that I love. That's one of my favorites. Just the cast is phenomenal. I think that's was one of Elle Fanning's breakout movies, but Riz Ifans and what's the guy's name who's been in the Godzilla movies? Who was the dad?
Kyle Chandler.
Chandler, yeah. Just great cast. The kids are awesome. To me, the thing I love about Super 8 is I'm like, this is what I wish E.T. had been.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit scarier and more serious.
Right, a little bit scarier and more serious, even though there is that sort of still family friendly, like great message about family and love and all this stuff. But I know Spielberg worked on the film with J.J. Abrams, and so I don't know if maybe that's what he had in mind, but I was like, oh yes, this is what I wish. So for me, Super 8 is my E.T. or what I wish E.T. was. So love that one. Another one for me that I think is one of the perfect things that strikes that balance between not being just this over-the-top blockbuster schlockfest like Independence Day, although great fun movie, or being just too sciencey and esoteric and whatever. And it's a movie like Nope that has some of that metaphorical stuff too, but that metaphor worked for me. And the sort of parallel thing is Signs from 2002. Love that. That's to me one of my just great, because it's got the mystery of what's going on and the crop circles, and it slowly, it starts out like, oh, is this just something happening here, to know what's happening around the world. Then it turns out, holy crap, it is really this full-on alien invasion, and how this family copes with that. And it's got the great scare moments it's got a little bit of creature feature in it with the the conflict with the aliens. It's got the whole family dynamic, and coping with the death of Mel Gibson coping with the death of his wife, and the family coping with the death of their mom, and then how this to me was a really good example that I'll juxtapose against our discussion on Nope, where the whole what seemed like an unconnected flashback to the death of her mom, and like, okay, you're like, what does this mean? What does this signify? Has a complete satisfying payoff and explanation in what happens at the end of the movie with Swing Away. So like that's a thing where some sort of flashback metaphor thing totally worked as part of the plot. So, but yeah, that's just it still creeps me out, those moments when they first start seeing stuff on TV and stuff first starts running around on the farm and everything else. I love that one.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Signs, because that's definitely a more UFO related one, and it even gets into more like high strangeness, where the aliens might not even be. They might be some sort of like other dimensional creature, or they have more paranormal aspects to it, which I love. But I guess I want to go back to the kind of first. I don't know if it's the first. I mean, I'm sure there's so many alien movies, and you mentioned Independence Day. I wanted to specifically avoid alien invasion movies, because like you can include Avengers, you could include like Justice League in there, and there's been 8 gazillion alien invasion movies. So I kind of wanted to avoid that, but I did want to give a quick shout out to the movie Battle LA, which came out in like 2011. It's just kind of one of those schlocky, almost kind of in the same vein as Independence Day, but I liked that because it played on the actual Battle of Los Angeles UFO event that happened in I think like 1943. It was during World War II. So that was cool. But so I guess you could go back to like the 1950s and talk about like The Day the Earth Stood Still. That's definitely more of like an alien contact or UFO, even UFO, because it does have a flying saucer in it movie. And then of course we just watched Quatermass in the Pit.
Quatermass in the Pit. Some folks who go back to Creature double feature days might remember the movie 5 Million Years to Earth, which was that's the title it was released in the US and was shown on TV on. But that's a movie that is about this thing that's found under a London subway, and they think it's a bomb or like a relic of the Blitz in London, and then it turns out to have all these sort of supernatural effects, and it's had historically this area where they find it, where this ultimately this tube station was built. Turns out, going back 1,000 years, there's been all these supernatural happenings and things around this area that have been attributed to the devil and demons, and it has this sort of psychological effect on people, and then they slowly uncover that it's a vehicle from Mars, and that Mars actually seeded life on Earth, or interfered with life on Earth when life on Mars was going down the tubes, and it's these weird creepy insect aliens, and it has all this has these far-reaching psychological effects on people. It's just this incredible mix. First of all, it's a Hammer film, and I'm a huge fan of Hammer horror films, all those classic in color Victorian age Dracula movies with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. So Hammer's the movie company that made those films, which I love. This has that same amazing cinematography, set designs, great performances. I love a lot of British films, and it just gets into so many. It's ancient alien theory before that was even a thing, even before the Chariots of God of the Gods book came out. It's got that. I love when, if it's done well, when sort of like seemingly supernatural, ghosty, devilly elements turn out to be extraterrestrial elements. It's just that's an old one. It is a movie from the 1960s, so it's not going to be slam bang action, great special effects, but that's one I just highly, highly recommend if people are interested in that sort of thing, to go and check out Quatermass in the Pit.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the Ancient Aliens thing, but even further than that, I mean, it really reminds me of you have Alien Crash, so it's kind of related to Roswell,
Mm-hmm.
and then it really does remind me of Skinwalker Ranch in a lot of ways too, because you have the idea that maybe there's some sort of thing buried under, like a crashed spaceship buried under Skinwalker Ranch, and that also that location also experienced like supernatural occurrences like poltergeists and cryptids and werewolves and whatever else. So there's that element to it. But then what struck me as especially relevant is you hear people coming from the government, like Lou Elizondo, if you're at all caught up with the current UFO events, but you have people saying that there are people in the government who are afraid of UFOs study because they think it's related to the devil and they don't want the government to study it. So there's this whole kind of subplot. The kind of human antagonist in Quatermass in the Pit is trying to convince everybody that it's demonic and that they should leave it alone and it's not worth studying. So I thought that was there's just so many different elements that we're seeing today echo in the UFO world. So I thought that was incredible.
Another one for me, going back very early to the days of the day the original Day the Earth Stood Still, is the original Thing from Another World, which most people are familiar with, the John Carpenter 80s remake, The Thing, which is another great movie, but obviously more focused on the horror. But Thing from Another World, just that whole idea of there was this crashed alien spaceship way millions of years in history, and this group of scientists up at the North Pole discover, weird magnetic readings, and then they discover that there's this basically flying saucer under the ice. They dig it up, and then the alien life form in there just kind of reanimates and just inserts itself into the base. Now, in the 1951 movie, they kind of go away from that. Well, first I should say it's based on a John W. Campbell science fiction story called Who Goes There, which is a tremendous title, and awesome story. The story is actually more similar to the John Carpenter film. John Carpenter follows the story much more closely than the 1951
I didn't
movie.
know that.
Yeah, because the 1951 movie, they make it sort of like this sort of humanoid shaped singular.
It almost looks like a gray. Yeah,
this singular alien that just sort of stalks the scientists around the base, as opposed to what happens in the John Carpenter movie is much more similar to what happens in the original story. So highly recommend Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, the short story or novella. Thing from Another World is a great, very atmospheric, very good 50s sci-fi movie. And then obviously The Thing is tremendous, the John Carpenter film.
Yeah, I guess moving on, I can get into some ones that I chose specifically for their connection to real life UFO lore. In the 70s, so we were talking about Quatermass, so this would have been a few years after that, was the UFO incident with James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons as Betty and Barney Hill. This is one I've been wanting to watch for a while, but it's not, or it hasn't been available to stream anywhere besides YouTube and like kind of a crappy, just like VHS quality rip. And I can't stand that. So I've seen clips of it before, but I've never seen the full thing until I saw that a kind of just small Blu-ray releasing company released a really nice copy of it on Blu-ray. So I had to get that and finally watch the whole thing. And that's really good because it is a TV movie, and a lot of the kind of personal drama is a little bit over the top and soapy. And but I mean, obviously James Earl Jones is an incredible actor, and Estelle Parsons is very good in it, and they do a really great job of recreating both the characters of Betty and Barney Hill just feel very authentic, and the whole story is just lifted right from the original book about it, and they recreate the actual hypnosis tapes pretty much like to the T. So I was really impressed with how accurate it was in bringing all of those details forward, especially since you don't see a lot of really authentic UFO alien abduction movies. They always have some sort of horror element, and like obviously this was scary, but it's everyone knows, or if you're familiar with the story of Betty and Barney Hill, obviously they come back, so there isn't any sort of like gory killing element to it that you might get in a more traditional horror movie. But moving on, there is also this pre-Blair Witch Project found footage movie called the McPherson Tape. It's a little, I mean, it's supposed to be a home movie, so a lot of it is just like shaky cam, people talking back and forth about, oh, what should we do? They're outside, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, some people might find it a little bit boring, but in that way, it's also very authentic. It's only 60 minutes long, too, so it really feels like you're getting this home movie of people that are being abducted by aliens, and there's this great sequence where three guys go out into the forest, and in the distance they see the UFO, and it has mist around it, and you see these shadowy figures, and then they point the alien's just holding a flashlight basically, but they're like, oh, he has a laser, and then they run back in, and then the aliens are like surrounding the house. So it really feels like a genuine alien sighting that was captured on film. And the actors are all just these like completely no-name improv actors that they just got like from the newspaper or whatever. And the best part about it is that the filmmaker actually ended up losing the film and thought it was like gone completely. Like there was a fire in the film warehouse or that he was storing it in or something. And so he thought it was gone completely until a few years later it started going around the UFO community as an actual like alleged UFO abduction that was caught on film. And there's this really hilarious story that the director tells about seeing the UFO people like getting all excited about it and seeing the aliens, which are just kids in a costume, and they're like, oh, I've seen those aliens, those look exactly like the ones I've seen. And so I think even though it's not a great movie because of its budget and the time it was released, just because that whole kind of historical context I thought is really funny, and not only does it predate the Blair Witch Project by 10 years, but it also has the distinction of actually having been lost and found, so it's a true found footage movie.
Yeah. No, that's one I definitely want to see. I haven't seen that yet.
So the last one, kind of along those same lines, is one that I know you have seen because we watched it together, which is The Fourth Kind, starring Mila Jovovich. And this one is another, well, it is a found footage movie, but it's half of a found footage movie, which is kind of interesting. It presents itself as a real, true story, but there's also a fictional kind of narrative component where Mila Jovovich and Liev Schreiber are kind of these psychologists investigating alien abduction case in Alaska, but then it's kind of bookended and interspersed between these segments are supposedly actual found footage segments of the actual events. So not only is it a really interesting way of presenting it, but they also get into some of that ancient alien stuff and even the more paranormal, like possession and ghosts coming back and that sort of thing. I really like that one, even though it's totally fictional. There was never any Alaskan UFO alien abductions, anything.
Yeah, I thought that movie. I mean, it's not like it's not like an award-winning film, but I always thought that I feel like that movie gets unfairly slammed. I thought it was very creepy and a pretty good story overall. That's definitely one of my honorable mentions. Two others that I want to talk about, and especially because it's got invasion in the title, it kind of, I suppose, crosses that line into an invasion movie, but the way it's done, obviously, is much more intimate and personal is the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, which is just it is an alien invasion movie, but it's sort of these pods that show up on Earth and take over people's bodies. So in that way, it's kind of a visitation movie too, and it's not a full-on shoot 'em up alien invasion movie. But that movie is just such great. It was on my Halloween list, and with all these, we didn't get to go through our whole Halloween list here, but with all the movies we watched, that we ranked that was one of the best ones and one of the scariest ones. There's also the remake with Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, I love that one.
And what's his name there?
Donald
President Snow.
Right.
And that's totally kind of very different, and it's a little, I find it a little slower.
Yeah, it's a lot longer.
The other one I want to shout out, which is another kind of weird spin on the whole alien invasion, not really, but sort of alien visitation, is a 1960 British film called Village of the Damned, where this little town out in somewhere in the English countryside, all of a sudden at one point the clock strikes noon and the entire village falls asleep and just passes out, like including animals, everything. And then so people figure this out and they send in fire and rescue and military and anytime anyone steps over the border of this town or anywhere in the border of this town, they immediately pass out and are out of it. And it's this weird thing. And then I don't know whether it's 24 hours later, everybody just wakes up and they're fine and it's back to normal, and years go by and nobody knows what the hell happens. But then all of a sudden these children are born, no seeming conception being related to it. And several women in this town give birth to these blonde, wide-eyed children that then, so obviously we know something's wrong and that these kids came from somewhere, and then things just kind of go crazy and slip out of control, and these kids have all these telekinetic powers and they kind of take over the village and start to almost sort of take over the world. And there are other children, I guess, in other areas, and it's a great, it's got some sort of Cold War kind of, scare aspects to it, but that's another great one that really stands up well. There was a really lousy remake. I think actually John Carpenter did it with Kirstie Alley, and that's not really that great. But that's a movie that stands up really well, I think, today.
Yeah, that's one I haven't seen, but it's on my list for Halloween, so I'll probably give it a watch.
Yeah, and and as we talk about these, for every movie that we mention, I'm sure there's people out there saying, "I can't believe they didn't mention this movie or that movie." So yeah, please, as I say, we post our tweets with the new episodes. So if you have any comments on movies we might have left out or that are big important favorites of yours, please let us know. One other quick shout out I'll give is to a movie called Under the Skin, which came out in 2013. Scarlett Johansson. That's a really very interesting twist on an alien visitation kind of. It's got some scary elements to it. A lot of people find it too slow and quiet, but I really thought it was good. And I'm obviously a huge Scarlett Johansson fan, so. But that's another interesting take on an alien visitation and how the tables get turned.
Yeah, that's another one I haven't seen, but I remember hearing about it when it came out.
So that is a wrap on our first kind of foray into looking back over some favorite movies in a particular genre. And again, it's so hard to contain movies about aliens into one, because there's just so many different iterations of them, and I know we've only really scratched the surface, but fun to talk about. We'll have more topics coming soon. We've got a whole host of stuff coming out. She-Hulk's coming soon. Andor, the Star Wars series, is coming soon. Game of Thrones, the new Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, the new Lord of the Rings show. Tons of stuff coming out that we'll be covering. So if you're listening, we thank you for listening. Please give us likes and follows and subscriptions and comments anywhere you're able to in the various places you may be picking up this podcast. We thank you for that, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks for joining us, guys. Can't wait to talk to you on the next one.